February 25, 1944, 24,000 feet over southern Germany. Captain Michael Brennan's B-17 dropped from formation, trailing smoke from two dead engines. The intercom crackled with 10 voices all saying the same thing. Bail out, jump now, take your chances with the cold German landscape below. Standard procedure, safe procedure. The procedure that kept most bomber crews alive when their aircraft died in the sky. But Brennan stared at his instrument panel and saw something different. Saw numbers where others saw death. Saw calculations where others saw catastrophe. Saw a path home that doctrine said did not exist. Number 2 engine was completely dead. Propeller feathered into useless position. Oil pressure reading 0. Metal frozen. System failed. Number 4 engine had quit 60 seconds ago. Cylinder head temperature had climbed past red, past warning, past any hope of survival. Coolant gone, metal seizing, machine dying, 2 engines dead out of 4. Physics said the B-17 could not maintain altitude, could not keep pace with the formation disappearing ahead into gray European sky, could not survive alone over Germany crawling with fighters hunting for exactly this situation. Wounded bomber, isolated target, easy kill, statistical certainty written in every after-action report. Doctrine said bail out immediately while altitude remained for parachutes to deploy safely. While crew had chance to scatter across countryside and evade. While survival was still mathematically possible through luck and evasion. Every training manual said this with absolute clarity. Every operations order reinforced this. Every pilot who had survived long enough to teach others said this with conviction born of experience. Jump. Abandon the aircraft. Save the crew. Accept the mathematics of capture or evasion or death on German soil. Those were the only options that doctrine acknowledged as valid responses to this situation. But Brennan was doing different mathematics in his head, while the aircraft shuddered and alarms screamed, and his crew waited for the order that would save their lives. Was calculating variables that doctrine never considered. Was seeing solutions in the numbers that fear made invisible to others. His co-pilot, Captain Jim Mitchell, repeated the suggestion with voice tight but controlled. Iowa farm boy voice that trusted procedures because procedures were written by people who survived to write them. Mitchell said, bail out now while we have altitude. Bail out before the fighters find us helpless and alone. Bail out before the remaining engines fail and we have no choice and no options. But Brennan was Brooklyn Depression kid who had learned mathematics before he learned fear, who understood that numbers told truth when emotion lied, who had watched his mother Sarah count pennies during the worst years and learned that calculations mattered more than hope or prayer or wishing. He keyed the intercom with hand that was steady despite everything. His voice was calm, the voice of a man doing chemistry problems at Brooklyn College, the voice his mother had used explaining the arithmetic of survival when survival required precision. He said, we are going home together. All 10 of us. Stay on your guns, watch for fighters, maintain your positions. We will make it because the math works, and I have done the math, and the numbers do not lie. The crew had flown with him long enough to recognize what that tone meant. This was not bravado from a pilot in denial. This was not desperate hope clinging to impossible fantasy. This was not last-ditch gamble by someone who refused to accept reality. This was a decision based on systematic analysis, based on calculations performed while engines burned and altitude bled away and the formation disappeared into the distance. They trusted his calculations more than they trusted German parachute landings, more than they trusted their own fear. They stayed at their positions because the professor had done the math and the professor's math always worked. The winter of 19 more over Europe was a mathematical equation written in blood and burning aluminum and young men who never came home. The 8th Air Force called it strategic bombing, called it necessary for victory, called it the path to defeating Germany through air power and industrial destruction. The crews called it something else entirely, called it suicide in daylight, called it flying toward death at 200 miles per hour in machines that were supposed to be fortresses, but felt like coffins when the flak started blooming black against the sky. Every mission was a statistical proposition that could be calculated with brutal clarity. How many planes leave England in the morning? How many return before dark? How many men never see those white cliffs again? By late 1943, the numbers were grim as the winter itself. More than 30% of heavy bomber crews did not survive their required 25 mission tours. Some groups lost half their crews. The 100th Bomb Group lost more than half in some terrible months. Other units called them the Bloody 100th, and the name was not said with affection or camaraderie. Was statement of statistical fact written in empty bunks, impersonal effects, shipped home in small wooden boxes, and replacement crews arriving weekly to fill the gaps. The mathematics of death playing out with mechanical precision, mission after mission after mission. But understanding how this moment came to be requires going back, requires understanding the boy who became the calculator, requires seeing Brooklyn during the years when hope was luxury that few could afford and calculation was the only path to survival. Michael Brennan grew up in Brooklyn during the years when the Depression crushed dreams and families and futures with equal indifference. His father Samuel ran a small hardware store on a corner where optimism went to die slowly. The store struggled year after year as customers stopped coming because customers had no money to spend. 1937, the economics finally won. The store closed. Samuel died 6 months later. Heart attack, the doctor wrote on the death certificate with clinical precision. Broken heart, Sarah Brennan knew in her bones with certainty that required no medical degree to understand. She was left with 2 sons in a Brooklyn apartment and the knowledge that understanding numbers meant staying alive in a world that did not care whether you lived or died. That hoping for the best was not strategy when rent was due and groceries cost money you did not have. That wishing changed nothing, but calculating changed everything if you calculated correctly and acted on those calculations. Young Mike absorbed this lesson not through lectures or rules or explicit teaching. Absorbed it through watching his mother divide $3 among 7 days. Through understanding that every decision had mathematical consequences that could not be wished away or ignored. Through learning that emotion did not change arithmetic, and arithmetic did not care about emotion or fairness or what you deserved. He was the boy who took apart radios to understand how they worked at fundamental level, who read repair manuals not to follow instructions blindly, but to understand why those specific instructions produce those specific results, who asked his teachers not what the answer was, but why that particular method produced that particular answer. His mother, Sarah, encouraged this relentlessly, told him that understanding had to precede action, told him that people who calculated carefully lived and people who guessed died. She did not know she was training a bomber pilot who would fly over Germany. Thought she was raising an engineer or scientist who would build things in peacetime, someone who would use mathematics to create rather than to survive. But the calculus was exactly the same. Understand the system completely, calculate precisely, act on the numbers rather than the fear. Those were the tools that kept you breathing when the world was trying to kill you. Brooklyn College accepted him in 1941. He studied chemistry because he liked the precision of it, liked how molecules followed rules that could be calculated and predicted with mathematical certainty, liked how reactions proceeded according to laws that did not change based on hope or fear or desire, thought about law school after graduation, had the grades for it, had the analytical mind that lawyers needed, had plans that extended into a future that assumed the world would remain predictable and rational and governed by rules that made sense. Then Pearl Harbor happened in December 1941 and every calculation changed. Every plan, every assumption, every prediction about what the future would hold. His younger brother Danny enlisted in the Navy within a week of Pearl Harbor. 20 years old, wanted to fight, wanted revenge for the attack, wanted to prove something that war makes young men want to prove. Got assigned to destroyer duty in the Pacific Theater. Wrote letters home that revealed he understood what their mother had taught both of them. That survival required calculation even in combat. That understanding your ship's capabilities meant knowing when to engage the enemy and when to retreat to fight another day. That mathematics mattered more than courage when the two opposed each other in tactical situations. Danny wrote about calculating fuel consumption during extended battle, about understanding radar ranges and using geometry to predict where the enemy would be rather than where the enemy was. Mathematics at sea proving the same as mathematics on land. Numbers saved lives when applied correctly under pressure. Mike enlisted in the Army Air Corps 6 months after Pearl Harbor. Not from patriotism alone, though patriotism existed and was real and mattered. Not from revenge alone, though anger at the attack burned hot enough to sustain action. From calculation. From understanding that this war would be won or lost in the air over Europe. That whoever controlled the skies would control the outcome of the ground war. That bomber crews needed pilots who understood more than just how to fly. Needed pilots who could calculate fuel and weight and altitude and make life or death decisions when doctrine provided no guidance and training offered no answers. He wanted to fly the B-17 because it was the most complex machine in the American arsenal, was the aircraft that required the most understanding, was the plane where calculations mattered most and mistakes killed fastest and margins were thinnest. Flight school revealed something about Brennan that his instructors noticed immediately and commented on in his evaluation reports. He did not just follow procedures mechanically, did not just memorize checklists and execute them without thought. He absorbed procedures, internalized them, then asked why with persistence that some instructors found refreshing and others found annoying. Why this specific altitude for this specific maneuver? Why this particular power setting for that particular condition? Why did the manual specify these exact numbers and not others? He wanted to understand the machine at a level that went far beyond rote memorization of procedures. Wanted to know what the B-17 could do that the manual never mentioned, because the manual assumed you would never need to know, because needing to know meant you were already dying. His instructors found this both impressive and deeply concerning. Impressive because he clearly understood aircraft systems better than most pilots ever would, even after years of flying. Concerning because pilots who questioned doctrine too aggressively often died testing theories that doctrine had already proven fatal through the deaths of previous questioners. September 1943 brought him to England, to Thorpe Abbott's airfield, home of the 100th Bomb Group. The reputation preceded his arrival like a ghost that haunted the briefing rooms. The bloody 100th, worst loss rates in the entire 8th Air Force. Crews that flew out on missions and did not come back. Empty chairs at morning briefings that multiplied week after week. Names scratched off duty rosters with brutal regularity. The mathematics of death playing out in real time with consequences measured in lives rather than abstract numbers. Brennan's crew formed up in the cold English rain that never seemed to stop. 10 men who would live in close proximity to violent death for however long they survived. Mitchell as co-pilot, Bradley as navigator with MIT mathematics degree that made him valuable for more than just finding targets. Murphy as bombardier, Walsh as tail gunner. Another Brooklyn kid who understood that calculating was surviving. Each man a specialist in his position. Each man dependent on the others for survival. Each man gambling that their pilot's understanding of numbers would keep them alive when luck and doctrine failed. His first combat mission was Stuttgart in September '43. The flak was heavy, black bursts that bloomed at altitude like deadly flowers growing in the sky. Each burst was shrapnel expanding at velocities that punched through aluminum like paper through tissue. The German fighters were aggressive beyond anything training had prepared them for. Focke-Wulf 190s making head-on passes at combined closing speeds over 500 miles per hour. Physics multiplying lethality beyond human comprehension. Brennan's aircraft took hits but made it home with holes you could put your fist through. 73 holes counted by ground crew. Aircraft looked like metal shredder had attacked it. He learned what briefings could never teach in safety of classrooms. The sound of metal tearing under stress. The smell of cordite and hydraulic fluid mixing in the freezing air at altitude. The way fear sat in your chest like physical weight that made breathing hard and thinking harder. But he also learned something more important than fear. Learned that most pilots reacted to damage with immediate emotion. Panic or resignation or acceptance of impending death. Brennan reacted with calculation instead. Counted holes. Measured control response. Calculated what systems were damaged and what remained functional. Understood that surviving meant knowing exactly how damaged you were and what that damage meant for your remaining options. His best friend from flight school was Lieutenant David Chen, pilot of another B-17 in the same group. Same squadron, same missions flown in formation together. Chen was brilliant, top of his class at every stage of training, flew by the book with absolute precision, followed every procedure exactly as written, trusted doctrine completely because doctrine was written by people who had survived long enough to write down what worked. October 1943 brought the mission to Schweinfurt that would change everything Brennan believed about survival. The target was ball-bearing factories deep in Germany. Strategic priority, high-value target, the kind that pulled every German fighter within 50 miles. Brennan and Chen flew in the same formation, watched each other's aircraft, called out threats over the radio, coordinated defensive fire. The target area was hell manifested at 20,000 feet. Flak so thick you could almost walk on it. German fighters swarming like hornets from a kick nest. Chen's aircraft took multiple hits, lost an engine to direct flak burst, began falling behind the formation as power decreased and speed bled away. Standard procedure was absolutely clear, had been drilled into every pilot until it became instinct, written in the blood of crews who had not followed it. Bail out before you fall too far behind the formation, before you become isolated and vulnerable, before fighters can focus on you alone without the protective fire from other bombers. Chen followed procedure with perfect precision, ordered his crew to bail out. 9 parachutes blossomed white against the gray German skyline. Chen stayed at the controls to keep the bomber steady and level for their jumps. Standard procedure, proper execution, textbook perfect. Then he prepared to jump himself. But the German fighters did not wait, did not honor any implicit rules of aerial combat. Saw the crew bailing out, saw the bomber without defensive fire, pressed their attack with ruthless efficiency, set the aircraft on fire with cannon shells. Chen never got out, never had the chance. The B-17 fell trailing fire and smoke, and one pilot who had followed doctrine perfectly and died perfectly because doctrine assumed enemies would be civilized enough to let you abandon a clearly doomed aircraft. But assumptions were not facts, and doctrine was written for a different kind of war. Brennan watched from his position in formation. Watched the parachutes deploy and drift down toward capture or worse. Watched the bomber burn. Watched it spiral down until it disappeared below the cloud layer. That night he sat on Chen's empty bunk, staring at nothing. Looked at Chen's flight logs later. Perfect documentation. Perfect adherence to procedure. Perfect execution of every step. Perfect death because perfect was not enough when the enemy adapted faster than the manual could be updated to account for changing tactics. Brennan understood something fundamental that night. Understood that doctrine was written by survivors, but not all situations were survivable by following doctrine. That sometimes following the book killed you just as surely as ignoring it. That sometimes calculating your own answer was the only answer that worked. He began developing a theory that night. Did not share it with anyone, did not write it down, did not risk being called crazy or reckless or dangerous by operations officers who believed in procedures above all else. Kept it as private conviction built on observation and mathematics in the death of his best friend. The theory was simple in concept and radical in execution. You could bring a crippled bomber home alone, without formation support, without altitude advantage, without half your engines if necessary. The mathematics work it if you understood the aircraft completely at an engineering level. If you were willing to fly it beyond the manual's conservative margins. If you prioritize crew survival over procedural compliance. The theory ran counter to everything the Air Force taught. Counter to accumulated wisdom from thousands of combat missions. Counter to survival statistics that proved staying in formation kept you alive and falling behind killed you. But the statistics did not account for pilots who understood aircraft as systems rather than as mysterious machines. He began testing his theory carefully and systematically. Not in combat where mistakes killed 10 men. In training flights over England where mistakes meant embarrassment, not death. Would shut down an engine deliberately during flight. Calculate how the aircraft handled with asymmetric thrust. Measure fuel consumption with 3 engines versus 4. Understand trim requirements for different configurations. Learn exactly how the B-17 behaved when pushed to edges the manual said not to approach. His crew chief, Sergeant Charlie Morrison, noticed immediately because good crew chiefs notice everything about their aircraft. Morrison was 38 years old, Texas mechanic who understood aircraft as engineering systems, not as collections of parts that somehow flew. Most crew chiefs would have reported a pilot for deliberately creating emergency conditions during peacetime training, would have worried about aircraft being damaged, would have filed paperwork and complaints up the chain of command. Morrison asked questions instead. What are you testing, Captain? Why these specific conditions? What calculations support this approach? Curious rather than alarmed. Brennan showed him the mathematics without holding him back. Showed thrust calculations based on engine performance curves, weight and balance charts for different fuel loads and bomb loads, fuel consumption rates at various power settings and altitudes, stall speeds at different configurations and weights. Morrison checked everything against official engineering specifications, confirmed that the aircraft could sustain the loads Brennan's calculations predicted, confirmed that the manual's margins were deliberately conservative, built in safety factors that could be reduced if you understood exactly what you were reducing and why you were reducing it. Morrison looked at Brennan after reviewing everything and said, "You are right, Captain. The machine can do what your mathematics says it can do. Question is whether you can fly it precisely enough, whether you can maintain control at margins where most pilots would lose control and die." Brennan said, "I can if I understand it completely, if I know exactly where every edge is located." Morrison said, "Then I will maintain this aircraft to tolerances that support your calculations. We'll check everything obsessively. We'll make certain the machine can do what the mathematics says it can do." Partnership formed between pilot who calculated and mechanic who maintained, both understanding that precision made impossible missions possible. Major Paul Anderson was the 100th Bomb Group's operations officer, 27 years old but looked older from stress and responsibility. Combat veteran from early war missions over France before rotation back to England, had seen pilots try innovation, had seen them die trying things that seemed clever until physics disagreed violently, believed absolutely in doctrine because doctrine was written in blood. Every procedure existed because someone had died proving what not to do. Anderson represented institutional wisdom, represented accumulated knowledge of thousands of missions and thousands of deaths, represented the belief that individual brilliance was less reliable than systemic consistency applied across all crews. He watched Brennan carefully with growing concern, noted the unusual flight patterns during training missions, noted the questions Brennan asked during operational briefings, questions that probed deeper than other pilots bothered to ask, questions that suggested someone calculating options that doctrine did not acknowledge as valid. December 1943 brought the mission to Bremen that would test whether Anderson's concerns were justified. German fighters hit Brennan's formation hard over the target. His number 3 engine took shrapnel damage from near-miss flak burst, oil pressure dropping toward zero rapidly. Standard procedure was crystal clear. Feather the propeller immediately, shut down the engine before it seized, and cause fire that could destroy the aircraft and kill everyone aboard. But Brennan had calculated a different approach. Understood that the engine could run another 10 minutes on remaining oil if he reduced power significantly and accepted lower efficiency. 10 minutes was enough to reach the coast, to get over water where bailing out meant possible rescue by air-sea rescue rather than certain capture on German soil. He nursed that damaged engine with obsessive attention to every gauge reading, monitored temperatures constantly, adjusted power with precision, coaxed the dying engine to keep running when it wanted to quit. Made it to the coast, then shut it down over the English Channel where failure was survivable. Landed at base on 3 engines with oil temperature gauge buried deep in the red zone. Aircraft survived. Crew survived. Mission accomplished through calculation rather than through following doctrine blindly. Anderson called him to the operations office immediately after debriefing. Office was small and cold and smelled of cigarette smoke and institutional anxiety. Anderson said, "You flew that engine beyond all recommended limits, Captain. You risked catastrophic fire. You risked explosion. You risked 10 lives on a calculation that could have been wrong. You violated procedures that exist specifically to keep crews alive." Brennan responded calmly. Said, "I calculated the risk carefully, sir. The engine could sustain reduced power for the duration required, given remaining oil volume and heat dissipation rate. Fire risk was minimal, given temperature and pressure readings. Explosion risk was negligible, given the specific damage pattern. The mathematics supported my decision completely. Every variable was accounted for systematically." Anderson leaned back in his chair and looked at this young captain who talked about combat like it was a chemistry examination. Said, "The mathematics do not account for shrapnel you cannot see, for damage that appears hours later, for cascading failures that start small and become catastrophic. You got lucky today, Captain. Do not confuse luck with skill. Do not confuse one successful outcome with proof of method. Doctrine exists because it works more often than innovation does. Brennan said nothing in response, understood that arguing was pointless. Anderson believed in doctrine the way religious men believed in scripture. But Brennan believed differently. Believed rules were starting points, not ending points. Believed mathematics revealed options that rules never acknowledged. January 1944 brought the mission to Oschersleben that would prove which approach was correct. Deep penetration into Germany. Maximum range for fighter escorts. The bombers would be alone for long stretches. German fighters would exploit this mercilessly. Standard doctrine said maintain formation position regardless of damage. Formation integrity mattered more than individual survival. Brennan's aircraft was assigned to High Squadron, position that drew the most attacks because it was exposed above the main formation. The German fighters came in overwhelming force. Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts hitting from multiple angles simultaneously. Brennan's aircraft took severe hits. Number 1 engine damaged. Number 4 engine showing critical overheat. Standard doctrine said, maintain position. Accept the damage. Stay with formation. But Brennan calculated that number 4 would fail catastrophically within minutes. He made the decision that violated every training manual, dropped out of formation deliberately, stabilized at lower altitude on 2 engines, called to his crew that defensive fire was everything now. Fighters found them quickly. But the crew fought with precision born of trust. They flew home on 2 engines, landed safely, and 10 men survived. Anderson watched and understood that doctrine had limits. That maybe this Brooklyn kid with his calculations was showing them something important. Something that could save lives if properly understood and properly taught. The pattern was forming. The theory was becoming fact. The mathematics was proving itself mission by mission, and February 25th would prove it beyond any remaining doubt. Mission briefing began at 0400 hours on February 25th, 1944. Officers pulled back the curtain, revealing a map with red yarn stretching deep into southern Germany. The target was the Messerschmitt factory at Regensburg, 600 miles from England, beyond the range of fighter escort for most of the journey. The room went quiet in the way that experienced crews recognized immediately. This was not a milk run. This was the kind of target that killed men. Strategic logic was brutally simple. Regensburg produced Bf-109 fighters. Destroy the factory and you reduce the German fighter force threatening every bomber over Europe. Mathematics written in bombs and burning factories. Except the Germans knew exactly how valuable that target was, would defend it with everything available. Intelligence officers spoke in measured tones about estimated opposition. Heavy flak concentrations, multiple fighter bases within intercept range, estimated losses 15 to 20%. The crews did their own calculations in the silence. 15% meant 1 aircraft in 7 would not return to England. 20% meant 1 in 5. Look around at the faces you knew. Some would not be here tomorrow. Weather that February morning was marginal. Low clouds hung over England, fog at altitude, the kind of conditions that made formation assembly dangerous even without Germans trying to kill you. But the mission was approved. Maximum effort, every available bomber. Strategic necessity overriding tactical caution. The invasion of Europe was coming. Every factory destroyed now meant fewer fighters opposing the landings later. Brennan and his crew walked to their B-17 through pre-dawn darkness. The aircraft was cold. Frost covered the wings in crystalline patterns. Ground crew had performed pre-flight checks, but Brennan did his own walk-around. Ritual. Way of knowing the machine before trusting it with 10 lives. Morrison met him near the tail. Said she is ready, Captain. All systems checked. Fuel tanks topped completely. Engines as good as I can make them. She will hold together if you fly her within the margins we calculated. Brennan said I will fly her exactly right because anything less means we do not come home. Engines started with coughs of blue smoke. 4 right cyclone radials turning over. Sound thunderous across the airfield. Dozens of bombers coming alive simultaneously. Brennan and Mitchell ran through startup checklist. Each item confirmed. Each system verified. Bradley plotted the course with MIT precision. Murphy checked the bomb load. 4,000 pounds of high explosive. The mathematics of destruction. Formation assembly took longer than planned in the poor visibility. Bombers circled, climbing through cloud layers, finding their group, finding their position in the combat box. Fuel burned. Engines strained. They crossed the channel in tight formation. Altitude 24,000 feet. Temperature negative 40 degrees. English coast fell away. Ahead was occupied Europe. Ahead were German fighter bases. Ahead was Regensburg. First fighters appeared over Holland. Focke-Wulf 190s making head-on passes at combined closing speeds over 500 miles per hour. The B-17's guns hammered. Fighters peeled away and came again. Brennan held formation. This was doctrine. This was survival. But bombers were already falling. He saw one lose its wing, saw another streaming fire. The formation closed gaps and continued because the mission was larger than any single crew. Over Germany, the flak began. Black bursts blooming at altitude. Each burst was shrapnel expanding at lethal velocity. They flew through it because the target demanded it. The bomb run was worst. Long minutes of straight and level flight. Aircraft belonged to the bomb site. German flak gunners knew the bombers could not maneuver, adjusted their fire with practiced efficiency. Bombs away. The B-17 lurched upward. Formation began its turn away from target. Flak continued. Fighters returned. Then everything went catastrophically wrong for Brennan's aircraft. Close flak burst rocked the plane violently. Alarm sounded. Number 2 engine trailing smoke. Oil pressure dropping. Brennan feathered immediately. Shut down. 3 engines now. Formation was pulling away. Could not slow down. Standard procedure. Aircraft in distress falls behind. Brennan increased power on remaining engines. The B-17 struggled to keep pace. Fuel consumption increased. He did the math. Range versus fuel. Speed versus altitude. Numbers were not encouraging. Then number 4 engine cylinder head temperature began climbing. Into yellow. Toward red. Mitchell reported possible coolant loss. Brennan knew what this meant. Minutes before that engine failed. He made the announcement every crew feared. Prepare to bail out. Standard procedure. Safe procedure. 10 parachutes. 10 chances with German territory below. Mitchell repeated it. Bail out now while we have altitude. Bradley agreed. They were over Germany, alone. 2 engines, no fighter cover. Every German pilot in the sector would see them. Statistics said bail out. Probability said bail out. Doctrine said bail out. Everything said bail out except the mathematics Brennan was calculating. He looked at instruments with absolute focus. Did calculations practiced hundreds of times. 2 engines provided approximately 3,600 horsepower. B-17 fully loaded required 4,500, but they were not fully loaded. Bombs gone, ammunition expended, fuel burning constantly reducing weight. Current weight meant 2 engines could maintain flight if he reduced altitude and accepted lower speed. Lower altitude meant higher air density, more efficient thrust. The mathematics balanced if calculated precisely. Fuel remaining approximately 400 gallons. 2 engines consumed roughly 100 gallons per hour. 4 hours endurance. Distance to English coast, 450 miles. At 150 miles per hour with reduced altitude, flight time would be 3 hours. Margins were tight. Required most direct course. Required no evasive maneuvers. Required perfect navigation. Required engines to keep running. Required many things to work perfectly. But possible was better than certain. Bailing out meant capture or death. Flying home was unlikely, but unlikely was infinitely better than certain when certain meant the end. He keyed the intercom. Voice was calm. He said, "We are going home together, all 10 of us. I have calculated the fuel, the thrust, the weight, the distance. The mathematics works if we execute precisely. Stay on guns, watch for fighters. Jim monitor engines constantly. Tom plot most direct course home. Frank lighten aircraft. Eddie watch our 6. Trust the numbers. We are bringing this bird home because mathematics says we can, and mathematics does not lie when calculated correctly." Silence. Then Mitchell said, "I trust your calculations." Bradley said, "Plotting course." Murphy said, "Dumping weight." Walsh said, "Tail clear." They had flown with him long enough. They trusted his mathematics more than German territory. They stayed. Brennan dropped the B-17 to 15,000 feet. Lower altitude reduced engine strain, also brought them within range of every light flak gun. But he was betting on movement over altitude. He flew manually, felt the aircraft through controls, felt how it wanted to yaw with asymmetric thrust, compensated constantly. This was precise management of failing system. Keeping aircraft in envelope, the manual said, did not exist. Gunners scanned constantly. Walsh called contacts. Two Focke-Wulfs closing. Bradley calculated intercept time, 50 seconds. Brennan made small controlled movements, just enough to disrupt fighter aim, give gunners angles. Waist gunners opened fire. First Focke-Wulf broke left. Second came in. Walsh got him. Both Germans broke off. Brennan leveled immediately. Every maneuver cost speed. Every speed loss cost altitude. He flew the numbers with absolute discipline. Mitchell monitored engines obsessively. Number 3 temperature rising slightly. Acceptable. Number 1 oil pressure dropping slowly. Acceptable. Called updates every 5 minutes. Brennan adjusted mixture settings. Leaned engines. Every gallon mattered. Bradley provided heading corrections. Navigation by dead reckoning. Charts and compass. Pure mathematics translating position into course. Over France, weather deteriorated. Cloud layers thickened. Visibility dropped. Clouds hid them from fighters. Also hid ground. Made navigation estimation. Brennan flew on gauges. Trusted instruments. This was why he trained this way. Numbers on instruments were direct readouts of physics. Understanding numbers meant understanding aircraft. Understanding aircraft meant surviving. Fuel gauges declined steadily. Brennan recalculated constantly. Wind was major factor he could not measure precisely. Had to estimate. Had to adjust. He adjusted mixture again. Ran engines leaner. Extended range. Mitchell suggested emergency landing France. Bradley mentioned Switzerland. Both reasonable. Both would guarantee crew survival. Brennan acknowledged options. Then continued toward England. Continued because mathematics said he could make it. If numbers worked, you trusted numbers. English Channel appeared ahead. Gray water under gray sky. England. Safety. Almost. Brennan began shallow descent. Saved fuel. Prepared final approach. Crew released breath held for 3 hours. But not safe yet. Thorpe Abbott still 20 miles away. Number 3 engine began to sputter. Fuel gauge read empty. Tank was dry. Engine coughed. Tried to pull from empty tank. Failed. Died. Propeller windmilled. Brennan feathered immediately. 1 engine now. Only number 1. Only thing between 10 men and very hard landing. Physics changed instantly. 1 engine could not maintain altitude. Could not overcome drag. B-17 descended whether he wanted or not. He managed controlled descent. 200 feet per minute, then 300, then 400. Altimeter unwound. Critical became desperate. Mitchell on radio giving position updates. Bradley calculated time to base. Morrison's voice from tower. Said number 1 will run captain. I maintained it. I know it. Trust the engine. Trust mathematics. Bring them home. Brennan said I trust both. We are making it because numbers work, and you made numbers work. Gunners silent now. Done their job. Now entirely on pilots, on Brennan's understanding, on his calculations. They watched altimeter. Watched Brennan fly with precision that looked easy because he understood exactly what he was doing. Walsh said he will make it. He always makes it. Math works because he makes it work. Crew trusted him. Learned calculations worked. Mathematics defeated physics. 5 miles from Thorpe Abbott's. Altitude 600 feet descending. Tower called wind and runway. Tailwind, not ideal, would require longer landing roll, but no fuel to go around. 1 chance. Mitchell said, how bad is tailwind? Brennan said within margins. Everything within margins if calculated correctly. Anderson was in tower watching. Saw lone B-17 approaching too low, too slow. 1 engine running. Saw mathematics in motion. Saw doctrine being rewritten. 4 miles. Altitude 400 feet. Brennan could see base. See runway. Pattern clear. Every other aircraft diverted. Emergency vehicles positioned. Waiting to see if mathematics worked or 10 men died. 2 miles. Lowered landing gear. Hydraulics groaned. Gear locked down. Green lights confirmed. Drag from gear increased descent. Compensated with throttle increase. Number 1 responded. Barely. Temperature climbing. Oil pressure marginal. Engine had run 3 hours at power never designed to sustain. 1 mile. Altitude 200 feet. Too low and too slow. Stall warning chirping. B-17 flying edge of collapse. Controls going soft, but aligned with runway, going to make it to field. Fence pass beneath. Brennan flying on instinct, built from hundreds of landings, and understanding, built from months of calculations. Could feel controls softening. Feel aircraft settling. Pulled throttle idle. Engine spooled down. B-17 dropped last 20 feet onto runway. Hard. Tires screamed. Shock absorbers compressed violently. Metal groaned, but gear held. Airframe held. Held together because Morrison maintained perfectly and Brennan flew precisely. Let aircraft slow naturally. Applied brakes gently. Too much and tires blow. Too little and runway ends. Modulated perfectly. Aircraft slowed. 50 miles per hour. 40, 30. Steered off runway onto taxiway. Emergency vehicles followed. Continued to hard stand away from other aircraft. Set parking brake. Shut down last engine. Sudden silence profound. For 3 hours, engine roar, wind noise, radio chatter, gunfire. Now quiet. Mitchell looked at him. Could not speak. Crew began moving. Hatches opened. Men climbed onto wing. Stood on solid ground. They did not cheer. Too exhausted. Too aware how close margins were. Brennan completed shutdown checklist. Then climbed out. Ground crew already inspecting. Counting holes. Over 200 shrapnel holes. 2 engines destroyed. Fuel tanks nearly empty. Hydraulic fluid leaking. Morrison walked around slowly. Stopped near Brennan. Shook head in confirmation. Said mathematics worked, Captain. She held together because you flew within calculated margins. Because understood completely. Because brought them home using numbers instead luck. Brennan said we brought them home. Your maintenance. My calculations. Their trust. All together. Morrison said do it again. Teach others. Change the doctrine. Save crews. Brennan said Anderson will never approve. Morrison said make him approve. Use mathematics. Numbers do not lie. Mission debrief 2 hours later. Intelligence officers wanted details. Brennan provided information methodically. Operations officer asked about decision not to bail out. About single engine landing. Brennan presented calculations. Fuel consumption at reduced altitude. Thrust requirements. Weight reduction. Distance versus endurance. Math was sound. Other pilots listened. Thinking about own crews. Doctrine said bailout, but Brennan demonstrated alternative. Story spread. The pilot who brought them home on one engine. What the group did not know was this was not isolated incident. This was pattern beginning. Over next 3 months, Brennan flew 17 more missions. Brunswick, Berlin, Augsburg, Kassel, Frankfurt, Posen. Each mission carried same risks. Repeatedly, his aircraft took severe damage. Engine lost over Brunswick. Hydraulic failure over Kassel. Flak damage so extensive over Frankfurt, group commander assumed plane lost. Each time Brennan brought crew home. Refused to abandon aircraft others would consider unflyable. Calculated margins and flew them precisely. Posen mission was definitive. B-17 lost 2 engines and half rudder. Conventional response was bailout. Brennan calculated different solution. Could compensate for missing rudder with asymmetric thrust. Could fly 300 miles at 4,000 feet if calculated trim precisely. Told crew we are going home. This will take 4 hours manual flying. You watch for fighters constantly. We will make it because mathematics works. Flew that aircraft 4 hours. Hands never left controls. Made constant adjustments. Used throttles like rudder pedals. Mitchell called position updates. Bradley provided heading corrections every 2 minutes. Morrison monitored from ground. Gunners scanned obsessively. Aircraft flew like wounded bird. Awkward, barely controlled. But controlled. Brennan brought it home because understood exactly how much control needed and how to extract it from damaged systems. Anderson watched from operations. New doctrine challenged again. New one pilot proving something Air Force did not officially acknowledge. That mathematics could expand survivability beyond procedures. That understanding aircraft completely created options manuals never mentioned. But Brennan had also attracted attention from other side, from someone who thought same way. Major Hans Richter, Luftwaffe ace, 47 bomber kills. Analytical pilot who studied tactics like engineers studied systems. Richter noticed pattern in reports. B-17 that kept surviving impossible damage. American pilot who seemed to calculate when others panicked. This intrigued Richter professionally. Was opponent worth studying? Worth hunting? May 1944. Richter led Stoffel intercepting formation heading Berlin. Spotted B-17 trailing smoke. Easy kill by normal standards. Pressed attack, expecting quick victory, but defensive fire too coordinated, too precise. Gunners calling positions with professional accuracy, pilot making exact movements giving gunners optimal angles. Richter's fighters took hits, broke off, studied markings. Same B-17 survived other impossible situations. Same crew, same calculating American. Tried again 2 days later. Same result. Coordinated defense. Precise flying, his fighters took damage. Target escaped. Richter became professionally obsessed. This was no longer about one bomber. Was about proving superior calculation could defeat inferior calculation. That his understanding could overcome Americans' understanding. Over 3 months, Richter tried 6 times to kill Brennan's bomber. 6 different missions, 6 tactical approaches. Each time American crew fought with precision beyond normal training. Not desperately, not with panic. With systematic coordination, speaking of complete trust in pilot, aircraft kept flying on margins that seemed impossible. Richter respected this deeply. This was not luck. Was systematic approach to survival. Was mathematics applied under extreme pressure. Was engineering mindset brought to combat. Richter understood because Richter thought same way. Just fought for different flag. His pilots asked why this one bomber mattered. Richter told them, this crew proves what I teach. That calculation defeats panic. That understanding defeats reaction. That precision defeats aggression. That American pilot thinks like engineer, trains crew like engineer, surveyors like engineer. I must kill him because if his methods spread, we lose advantage. Or must learn from him because methods that work deserve study regardless which side develops them. War will end. Engineering principles remain. Perhaps studying this American will teach something valuable beyond war. Meanwhile, April 1944 brought strategic shift. Allied invasion approaching. Disrupting German transportation became critical. 8th Air Force received orders to destroy bridge complexes across Germany. Brennan's group assigned 7 bridge targets over 10 days. 7 missions in 10 days was brutal. Crews needed rest. Aircraft needed maintenance. Men needed time to process fear. But invasion was coming and bridges needed to fall. Brennan's crew drew all 7 missions. Not because best, because most reliable. Because Anderson needed crews completing missions regardless damage. Because Brennan proved he brought planes home when others bailed. Bridge 1 Cologne. Heavy flak. Aircraft took 157 holes. Number 2 engine damaged. Shut down. Flew home 3 engines. Standard procedure now. Crew barely reacted. Walsh called number 2 feathered. Mitchell confirmed 3 engines sufficient. Bradley calculated fuel margins acceptable. Murphy said we are going home. Learning damage was calculated parameter, not emergency. Morrison repaired overnight. 18 hours, replaced engine, patched holes. Said she ready for Bridge 2. Bridge 3 mains, worse than Cologne. 2 engines damaged. Lost both. Flew 2 engines, Anderson and Tower watching takeoff. Radioed abort mission, return to base. Not mission capable 2 engines. Brennan calculated. Said respectfully, declining, sir. 2 engines sufficient. Mathematics works, fuel allows, continuing. Anderson said that is direct order to abort. Brennan said prioritizing mission completion and crew survival over procedural compliance. Target defended same tomorrow. Aircraft same tomorrow. Only difference whether complete today or risk tomorrow. Math says today. Continuing. Anderson could have grounded him. Could have threatened court-martial. Did not, wanted to see if mathematics worked again. If pattern held, Brennan completed mission 2 engines, dropped bombs, turned home, flew 300 miles, made it back, landed safely. 10 men home again. Anderson met him at Hardstand, said you disobeyed direct order. Brennan said I prioritized mission and crew over procedure. Anderson said you risk court-martial. Brennan said mathematics does not court-martial. Results do not court-martial. 10 men home does not court-martial. Anderson said nothing. Walked away. Did not ground Brennan. Did not file charges. Understood doctrine being rewritten real time. Bridges 456 followed same pattern. Damage. Calculations. Survival. By Bridge 7, crew stopped reacting to damage. Walsh called number 3 damaged. Mitchell responded, feathering. Bradley calculated still sufficient. Murphy added normal return. 7 bridges over 10 days. Over 900 documented holes across missions. 0 casualties. 0 bailouts. 10 men home 7 times. Statistical impossibility. That happened because pilot calculated margins, crew trusted calculations, mechanic maintained aircraft operations, officer documented everything. After Bridge 7, Anderson called Brennan to office. Had complete mission logs spread across desk. Every calculation, every decision point, every fuel computation, Anderson studied it all. Checked mathematics against engineering specifications. Verified calculations against performance data. Confirmed every decision supported by numbers, that mathematics work consistently. That luck not factor. That systematic approach transforms survival from chance to certainty when executed precisely. Anderson said I was wrong, Captain. Not about doctrine. Doctrine works average pilots, average conditions. But you not average and conditions never average. You understand aircraft beyond manual. Calculate beyond training. Execute beyond procedures. Crew trusts absolutely. Mechanic maintains perfectly. Methods work measurably. I studied logs, mathematics sound, results consistent. You demonstrated doctrine has limits. That understanding exceeds procedure. That calculation defeats panic. I going to headquarters, presenting your logs, recommending methods be studied, advocating pilots receive training in advanced calculations, requesting your crew develop new procedures. You changed my mind using mathematics. Now we change doctrine using your mathematics. War ended in May 1945. Brennan flew 52 combat missions total, more than double the standard 25 mission tour that was supposed to be the limit of what any crew could survive. He had survived conditions that killed thousands of others, had brought his crew home every single time without exception. Distinguished Service Cross for the Bremen mission, where he nursed a failing engine across the channel. Air Medal with multiple oak leaf clusters for sustained combat operations. But the awards were not the true measure of what had been accomplished. The measure was 10 men who survived because their pilot calculated instead of panicked. The measure was doctrine that changed because methods worked and were proven and were documented. The measure was survival statistics that improved measurably in squadrons where pilots learned his techniques and applied them systematically. The numbers did not lie. The mathematics had proven itself mission after mission. The methods had transformed from private theory to demonstrated fact to spreading doctrine that saved lives across the entire Bomber Command. He returned to the United States in late 1945. The war was over. Europe was rubble. Germany was defeated utterly. The bomber offensive had succeeded through sheer weight of industrial capacity and the courage of young men who flew into flak and fighters day after day, but also through innovations like his, through pilots who learned that understanding aircraft completely expanded what was survivable, through crews who learned that calculation could defeat panic, through mechanics who learned that precision maintenance enabled impossible missions, through operations officers who learned that doctrine could evolve when evidence demanded evolution. Law school waited at Brooklyn College. They accepted him immediately with full benefits under the GI Bill. He studied law with the same intensity he had studied chemistry before the war, with the same analytical approach he had applied to flying bombers over Germany. Legal cases were problems to be solved through systematic logic. Precedents were like aircraft performance curves that defined what was possible. Arguments were calculations dressed in different language, but following the same fundamental principles. He excelled because his mind was trained to find solutions through analysis rather than through intuition or emotion or guesswork. Career built itself naturally without drama. Law practice in Manhattan starting 1948. Corporate work mostly. Contracts and negotiations and disputes resolved through careful reading and precise argument. Married Rebecca in 1946 in a small ceremony in Brooklyn, with his mother Sarah present and his brother Danny, home from the Pacific where he had survived destroyer combat using the same calculation methods their mother had taught both of them. Quiet wedding. Simple. No need for drama when you had survived what they had survived together. Raised 3 children in the suburbs. House with a yard. Normal American life that the war had been fought to preserve and protect. He rarely spoke about the war when people asked at parties or social gatherings, would deflect questions politely, would say the real heroes were the ones who did not come back, would say that men in military cemeteries across Europe deserved recognition, not survivors who got to live full lives. But privately, he kept Chen's flight logs in a drawer, kept his own mission logs, kept Anderson's documentation, kept Morrison's maintenance records, kept the evidence that mathematics had mattered, that understanding had changed outcomes, that calculation had defeated panic, that numbers had saved lives when applied correctly under extreme pressure. 1962 brought unexpected contact from the past that he had not anticipated. Aviation Engineering Conference in Munich, Germany. Brennan attended to present a paper on bomber survivability analysis, using his wartime experience translated into general engineering principles that applied to any complex system. Room full of professionals discussing load factors and stress analysis and failure modes. After his presentation, a man approached, spoke with German accent that was educated and precise. Said Captain Brennan, "I am Hans Richter, former Luftwaffe major. I tried to kill you 6 times in 1944. Never succeeded. Your crew was too coordinated. Your flying was too precise. Your calculations were too accurate for me to overcome." Brennan looked at him carefully, saw former enemy standing before him 17 years after the war ended, saw fellow engineer, saw man who understood that warfare had both tactical and intellectual components, that both sides had pilots who calculated rather than just reacted, that survival came from understanding systems, not from hatred or ideology or superior courage. Richter continued with voice that carried genuine respect. He said, "After the war, I became aeronautical engineer. Studied your mission logs through captured documents that became available through various channels. Understood that you thought like engineer, not like warrior. Calculated like mathematician, not like fighter pilot. Survived like someone who understood systems completely, rather than someone who relied on courage or luck or divine intervention. I respect this deeply. Would you be willing to discuss your methodology if you can forgive speaking with man who tried to kill you repeatedly?" Brennan considered for a long moment, then said, "I am willing to discuss engineering regardless of past. You tried to kill me because war demanded it. I tried to kill your bombers because war demanded it from my side. But war is over and has been over for 17 years now. Mathematics transcends nationality. Engineering transcends conflict. Understanding transcends history and politics. Let us discuss what we learned, how we calculated under pressure, how we survived when others did not. Perhaps both of us can learn something valuable from comparing our approaches to the same fundamental problems." They talked for 6 hours in a hotel conference room that afternoon and evening, about calculations made under fire when there was no time to consult manuals or ask for guidance, about understanding aircraft completely enough to fly them beyond official limitations safely, about training crews to trust mathematics when fear said panic and run, about respecting margins while simultaneously pushing them when survival required pushing, about maintenance standards that made impossible missions possible through precision and attention to detail, about documentation that eventually changed official doctrine because evidence could not be ignored indefinitely, about the intellectual challenge of surviving through understanding rather than through luck or divine intervention or superior numbers. Richter said your crew coordination was absolutely perfect in every encounter. I could not penetrate your defensive fire despite trying 6 different tactical approaches over 3 months. Your pilot technique was absolutely precise. I could not predict your movements because you flew mathematics, not patterns or instincts. Your survival rate was statistically impossible according to all combat data. Yet you survived repeatedly across dozens of missions in the most dangerous theater. This taught me that engineering mind applied to combat produces results that neither pure engineering nor pure combat training achieves alone. I learned this from you, from trying to kill you and failing because you calculated better than I attacked. Brennan responded thoughtfully. He said you taught me that opponents who think like engineers require different respect than opponents who think like warriors. That the Luftwaffe had calculating pilots, not just aggressive pilots. That surviving required staying ahead of intelligent opponents, not just defeating aggressive ones. That understanding your methods forced me to refine my own methods constantly. That intellectual competition improved both of us, even though we were actively trying to kill each other. War is wasteful in many ways, but sometimes it produces unexpected learning opportunities. They became professional colleagues after that conference, corresponded regularly about aviation design challenges, met at subsequent engineering conferences across Europe and America, discussed approaches to problems that transcended their history as enemies who had tried to kill each other repeatedly. Richter invited Brennan to Hamburg, introduced his wife Greta, who was a school teacher, showed aircraft designs he was working on for commercial aviation, civilian transports built using principles learned from military aircraft design during the war. Brennan shared his complete mission logs without holding anything back, showed all his calculations, explained his methodology in complete detail, held nothing back because the war was over and engineering knowledge should be shared for the benefit of future generations. Richter studied the logs carefully over several days, then said this should be taught at universities, at engineering schools worldwide, at military academies. This is not just combat tactics for one specific aircraft in one specific war. This is systematic approach to managing failing systems under extreme pressure. This has applications far beyond aviation. This is engineering philosophy applied to survival. This should be preserved, should be shared widely, should be taught to every engineer who designs systems where humans depend on understanding margins between success and catastrophic failure. Brennan had not thought of his methods in such broad terms before this conversation, had seen them as specific solutions to specific problems in a specific aircraft during a specific war. But Richter was absolutely right. The principles were universal and timeless. Understand your system completely at the deepest level possible. Calculate your margins precisely using mathematics, not guesswork. Execute within those margins absolutely without deviation. Trust mathematics over emotion when the two conflict. These principles applied to any system where failure meant death. Applied to ships and submarines and aircraft and spacecraft and nuclear power plants and any machine where understanding meant survival and ignorance meant death. 1985 brought another unexpected visitor that connected past to present in ways Brennan had not anticipated. Air Force lieutenant wearing dress uniform appeared at Brennan's law office in Manhattan. Young man in his middle 20s. Stood at attention with military precision. Said, "Sir, my name is Lieutenant James Mitchell, Jr. My father was your co-pilot, Captain James Mitchell. He died 3 years ago from cancer. Before he died, he told me about February 25th, 1944, about the mission to Regensburg, about 2 engines failing over Germany, about you calculating a flight home on 1 engine when doctrine said bail out immediately, about bringing 10 men home using mathematics instead of luck or prayer or hope." The lieutenant continued with voice that carried emotion barely controlled through military discipline. He said, "My father told me you saved his life multiple times, not just on that one famous mission, but on many missions across many months. He said that without you, I would not exist, that without your calculations, he would not have survived the war, would not have come home to Iowa, would not have married my mother, would not have raised me and my 2 sisters. He said you changed how he thought about problems for the rest of his life after the war. That you proved calculation defeats panic when calculation is applied correctly under pressure. He made me promise to find you, to thank you personally, to tell you that his children exist because you did mathematics correctly." That his grandchildren exist because you understood aircraft completely. That 3 generations of our family owe their existence to your calculations being correct on multiple occasions. Brennan was moved more deeply than he expected by this visit, had not known that Mitchell had died 3 years earlier, had not maintained regular contact with most of his crew after the war ended, understood that survivors scattered, built new lives, moved forward from trauma. But hearing that one crew member had spoken about the missions before dying meant something profound, meant the calculations had mattered beyond mere statistics and reports, meant lives had been changed permanently, meant legacy was measured in families and generations, not just in survival rates and mission reports. He said, "Your father taught me as much as I taught him." He trusted calculations when trusting required courage that most men do not possess naturally. He learned the methodology quickly and applied it without hesitation, even when fear said do otherwise. He survived because he stopped panicking and started calculating systematically. I gave him the framework and the methods. He provided the trust that made framework operational under combat conditions. Both were absolutely necessary. Neither alone would have been sufficient for survival. Tell his grandchildren that their grandfather was a brilliant man who understood that mathematics works when applied precisely and courageously. Tell them he mattered greatly. Tell them I remember him clearly. Lieutenant Mitchell said, "There is more, sir, that you should know. I am F-15 fighter pilot, graduate of Fighter Weapons School at Nellis. We study your missions as part of our curriculum. We study your calculations as examples of decision-making under extreme pressure with incomplete information. You are taught at the Air Force Academy to all cadets, at flight training schools, at advanced tactical schools throughout the Air Force. Your mission logs are analyzed by aerospace engineers looking for principles. Your methodology is part of formal curriculum now. Your calculations are verified using modern computational methods and taught to modern pilots. Everything you did in 1944 is documented and proven mathematically and taught systematically in 1980. He continued. February 25th, 1944 is taught as case study in how understanding aircraft completely expands survivability envelope beyond what manuals specify as absolute limits. Your 7 bridges sequence is taught as example of sustained high performance under extreme pressure over extended time. Your entire career is used to demonstrate that calculation defeats panic, that understanding defeats fear, that mathematics saves lives when applied correctly. You changed doctrine, sir, changed how pilots are trained fundamentally, changed how we think about aircraft survivability. You saved lives in 1944. You are still saving lives in 1985 through pilots who learn your methods and apply them. Modern pilots use your mathematics. Your legacy is living and operational today. 2007, Brennan died at age 87. Heart failure, peaceful death at home surrounded by family. New York Times obituary mentioned Distinguished Service Cross, mentioned 52 combat missions, mentioned distinguished legal career spanning 4 decades. What the obituary could not fully capture was the number of lives changed by his example over 6 decades, the number of pilots who learned his methods, the number of families that existed because a bomber came home instead of a crew bailing out over Germany, the number of engineers who studied his calculations, the number of doctrine changes that traced back to his mission logs, the number of times someone calculated instead of panicked because they had learned that mathematics worked when applied precisely. Funeral at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors, flag-draped coffin, honor guards standing at attention, 3 volleys of rifle fire echoing across the cemetery, taps played by a military bugler, but also something unusual arranged by the Air Force at the specific request of surviving crew members and their families. 4 modern B-52 bombers flew over the cemetery in tight formation, flew with precision that honored heavy bomber crews from Second World War, flew to demonstrate that modern doctrine descended from principles Brennan had proven under combat conditions. Then the formation broke deliberately. 3 bombers continued on course. 4th bomber dropped from formation, peeled away, flew separately. Missing man formation. Tribute to the pilot who had proved that aircraft could fly alone when doctrine said impossible. Tribute to the mathematician who had calculated when others panicked. Tribute to the engineer who had understood machines completely. Tribute to the captain who had brought them all home every single time through understanding and calculation, an absolute refusal to accept that impossible meant impossible. Mitchell's son gave the eulogy standing at the podium, said my father told me that Captain Brennan saved his life 6 times in 1944 alone, saved it by calculating when others would bail out, by understanding aircraft when others would abandon them, by teaching his crew to trust mathematics when trusting required courage. My father lived 58 years after February 25, 1944. He raised 4 children. He saw 9 grandchildren before he died. He lived full and productive life because one pilot did mathematics correctly on one February morning over Germany, because one engineer understood margins, because one captain refused to accept that doctrine was absolute. 3 generations of my family exist because Captain Brennan calculated fuel and thrust and weight and distance correctly, because he proved that numbers worked when applied precisely, because he trusted mathematics more than he trusted fear, or doctrine, or conventional wisdom. That is legacy. That is immortality. That is what we honor today. Anderson attended the funeral, 90 years old now, wheelchair-bound, hands shaking from age, but present and mentally alert. Said after the ceremony to gathered family and former crew members, I doubted him initially. I warned him repeatedly that innovation meant death, that procedures existed for good reasons written in blood, that doctrine should be followed absolutely. He proved me wrong using mathematics that could not be argued with. He proved that doctrine could evolve when evidence demanded evolution. That understanding could exceed procedure when understanding was complete. That calculation could defeat panic when both were applied with absolute precision. Anderson continued, I became believer in his methods, became advocate for changing official doctrine throughout the command, became documentarian of his missions. I changed my mind because mathematics did not lie when properly applied and verified. I helped save lives because he taught me that numbers work better than procedures when numbers were calculated correctly and executed precisely. The best decision I made during the entire war was listening to his calculations instead of enforcing doctrine blindly. The best legacy I have is helping change procedures so that others could survive using his methods. He was right, and I was wrong initially, and I am proud that I admitted this and acted on it. Morrison's son attended the funeral, brought his father's maintenance list from 1940, original documents showing every repair performed, every calculation made, every tolerance checked, every note Morrison had made about aircraft condition, yellowed pages filled with technical details written in pencil. Said my father believed in Captain Brennan absolutely, maintained aircraft beyond normal specifications, kept engines running beyond their designed limits, made impossible missions possible through understanding systems completely. They were true partnership. Pilot who calculated and mechanic who maintained. Both understood margins. Both understood mathematics. Both understood that precision made survival possible when survival seemed impossible. He continued, Father died in 1987. Before he died, he told me that Captain Brennan trusted his maintenance like he trusted Brennan's calculations. That mutual trust saved 10 men repeatedly across dozens of missions. That partnership changed doctrine. That collaboration proved engineering approach to combat worked better than traditional approach. I am donating these logs to the Air Force Museum. They are evidence of how 2 men change warfare through understanding machines completely, through respecting each other's expertise, through working together with absolute precision. Rebecca attended, age 86 now, Brennan's wife for 61 years, said quietly to family members afterward. Mike never spoke much about the war in normal conversation, but sometimes late at night when he could not sleep, he would tell me about the calculations, about fuel and thrust and weight and distance, about understanding aircraft so completely that you knew what it could do before it did it, about Chen, who died following procedures perfectly, about crew members who trusted mathematics, about proving that numbers worked when fear said they would not work. She continued, he was not a warrior in traditional sense. He was engineer who happened to fly bombers, calculator who happened to serve him, teacher who happened to change doctrine. He applied engineering principles to survival, applied mathematical analysis to margins, applied precision thinking to chaos. He proved that understanding defeated fear. That calculation defeated panic. That thinking clearly under extreme pressure changed outcomes. That was who he was fundamentally. Engineer first, pilot second, warrior never. And that made all the difference in his survival and in his teaching others. Headstone was simple and understated. Name, rank, and dates of service. Distinguished Service Cross mentioned. No technical diagrams engraved. No calculations written in stone. Just facts presented plainly. But the headstone told only small part of the story. Real story was written in Air Force manuals that taught his methods to every pilot, in engineering textbooks that analyzed his calculations, in thousands of pilots who learned that understanding aircraft completely meant surviving, in families that existed because someone calculated instead of panicked during critical moments, in doctrine that changed because one captain proved mathematics worked better than procedures written in peacetime. That was legacy, not fame, not recognition in traditional sense, but fundamental change in how bomber crews approach survivability. Change so complete and so successful that it became invisible through incorporation into standard practice. Change that saved thousands of lives across decades. Change that demonstrated understanding, defeated fear, when understanding was complete and calculations were precise and execution was absolute. Change that mattered forever through mathematics, through engineering, through one Brooklyn Depression kid who learned that numbers save lives and then proved it 52 times over Germany and then taught it to generations of pilots who followed. The mathematics does not age, does not become obsolete. Principles of understanding system completely and calculating margins precisely and executing within those margins absolutely. These principles apply eternally to any situation where humans depend on machines, where failure means death, where calculation offers survival that panic cannot achieve. Brennan proved these principles in specific aircraft during specific war. But principles transcend specifics. Continue saving lives decades after original demonstration. Will continue saving lives for generations yet unborn who will face their own impossible situations and must choose whether to calculate or panic. That is legacy worth leaving. Not monuments or wealth or fame, but fundamental understanding that spreads and grows and saves lives long after teacher is gone. Mathematics that defeats fear. Calculation that defeats panic. Understanding that defeats death when understanding is complete, and calculation is precise, and execution is absolute. One Brooklyn Depression kid learned these principles from mother counting pennies during hard times, applied them to bomber combat, proved them across 52 missions, taught them to thousands, changed doctrine permanently, saved lives indefinitely. The sky remains. The mathematics remains. The understanding remains. Future pilots will face impossible situations, will calculate or panic, will understand or react, will survive or die based on choices made under pressure. Brennan's legacy gives them tools, gives them framework, gives them proof that calculation works, that understanding matters, that mathematics defeats fear absolutely. That is gift across generations. That is teaching that never ends. That is legacy measured in lives saved forever.